Work session meeting for Thursday, January 12th, 2023 at 7 PM. Roll call, Manager Falk.
Commissioner Stump,
Here.
Commissioner Atwood, Commissioner Gray,
Here.
Commissioner Zona.
Here.
Commissioner Wingren,
Here.
Commissioner Goss. President Hagus.
Here, everyone please stand and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If any residents would like to speak tonight, could you please sign the book at the podium? All right, let the record reflect no residents' input tonight. Work session discussion topics, Manager Falk.
And the first item I have is the agreement with the Westmoreland County Transit Authority. This agreement will have to be renewed, and the payment is a little over $6,000, and that is budgeted. Is there any questions or concerns or comments about that? That'll be on next month's agenda, or next week's agenda.
This is just a routine renewal that we have always done to provide bus service in the area
Correct.
to county. Yeah.
Oh, you need it? All right, next item is the Attorney General loft position extension. They're asking for renewal for one additional year. That'll have to be on for next week's agenda. Is there any questions or comments about the loft program? I think that is a very excellent program for us to be a part of, and they've been very active with a lot of drug seizure and arrests, and have been finding a lot of the drugs and stopping them from coming into the township as well. All right, moving on to the commissioner compensation. Last year, we had some discussion on commissioner compensation, so I did some fact-finding for the board. The last time that an ordinance was approved for stating the commissioner's compensation was in 1995. The township code was amended in 2020 that if townships with a population of 25,000 or more but less than 35,000, a maximum of $7,335 per year can be compensated to the Board of Commissioners. However, that has to be done by ordinance, and it would only affect newly elected commissioners beginning next year. So if the board would want to take action on that later on this year, the ordinance would have to be updated. All right, moving forward to agenda item number 4, the stormwater maintenance fee proposal. Our engineer, Bob Robinson, is here with our consulting engineer of KU Resources. A couple months ago, Commissioner Gray asked about eliminating the per capita tax, and we thought we found the solution with this stormwater maintenance fee to eliminate the per capita tax, introduce the stormwater maintenance fee. We can take some of the money out of the general fund and pay for it out of the stormwater maintenance fee fund. However, today I got an email that the State Commonwealth Court stated that the stormwater maintenance fee is a tax and not a fee. They ruled in favor of a school district that filed an appeal, which is probably going to cause shockwaves through other municipalities that already have enacted this fee. But however, since my recommendation is not to do anything with it right now until we see what transpires afterwards, we want to make the board aware of all these stormwater projects, unfunded or mandated unfunded MS4 projects, because it's going to cost a lot of money for us to do these. And we have to find a funding source.
Can I ask this? Other municipalities are running these unfunded mandated fees through their municipal authorities. Can we do that through Western Westmoreland?
Well, what they've done is either created a stormwater authority and has a board to oversee the fund itself, or they've managed the fund through their operating budget. For example, we would create a stormwater fund, a separate bank account, And then that would be a budgeted item that you guys would have to approve every year, just like the park fund or the capital improvement fund. So you can go about it either way.
In Virginia, I could add to that. I have talked to the sanitary authority, and they are willing, if we would institute a fee, to collect the fee on our behalf and charge a nominal fee. But, you know, with the new developments, that could change.
It just seems like the stormwater management should go along with like sewer and water, to me.
Well, they're not willing to manage the projects. What they've been willing to do would be to collect the fee on our behalf, but we would still, as a township, manage our particular stormwater projects. So they don't own, they own the sanitary sewers, but they don't own the storm sewers and the outfalls. I mean,
That's
they could.
understandable. But they're willing to collect the fee for it.
They're willing to collect the fee at a nominal fee, so because they have the database, and it would be easy for them to do. And we've been talking to them for a couple of years about this, but the new development today that we found out that can change things.
Harry, you said that the Commonwealth Court made a ruling. Where'd you hear that?
It was delivered to me by my managers group through the Lexus pool, I believe. I can forward that to you, that ruling.
Can you do it in the
Absolutely.
morning?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I could do that right now.
That'd be even better.
So I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and he's going to introduce KU Resources and still go over our presentation tonight and make you aware of what projects that we need to do and the cost.
So I'm going to ask Tyson Miller and Charlie Prokopic from KU Resources. KU Resources, they are the township's consulting engineers, and we have been working together, not only in the MS4 and stormwater, but other projects too. So, and I'm sure you're going to have some comments as we go along, Harry, and I will, along with Tyson and Charlie. So I'll turn it over to you right now. Then when we get up a particular slide, that we'll have some comments. So.
Very good. So good evening, everyone. I'm Tyson. I'm Charlie Prokopic. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, kind of explain that unfunded mandate that you kind of heard. We'll talk a little bit about some projects and how this fund could be applied or could have been applied to previous projects, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the other places that have enacted this. So, as Harry kind of mentioned, looking to develop a fee that would cover a myriad of different infrastructure-related costs, all stemming from MS4 mandates. And for those who don't know what MS4 is, that's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And, yep, speak it. So that's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And there are a couple of hundred MS4s throughout the state, maybe even more than that. The largest two are PennDOT and the Turnpike Commission, but each individual municipality, most urban municipalities are an MS4, as well as some universities, like Penn State and I think some of the other state colleges. Anyway, the distinction between why all of the other municipalities that have enacted this thus far and calling it a stormwater fee versus a tax is because they had been portrayed as providing benefit to everyone. So by that meaning that there are obviously tax-exempt entities, religious institutions, higher education, school districts, among others, but they oftentimes actually they have quite a bit of impervious area, so they are contributing to the stormwater, whereas if they are a tax-exempt entity, not having to pay for this. So again, the arguments have been that this was a fee because everyone's getting benefit from it. Even if you have stormwater management already on your property, and certainly a lot of newer developments are required to have stormwater management as part of their land development approval, eventually that water flows out of their site into a stream and flows into a culvert that's owned by North Huntington, or under a bridge, or what have you, or it's getting into an inlet or a pipe somewhere. So again, and then one other distinction is if it's termed an assessment, I guess legally an assessment is only a limited period of time. So you could have a stormwater project that might, last 5 years, you could call it an assessment and just assess someone a pro rata share for that, but that's for a limited amount of time. So the purpose behind having a fee is having a stable source of revenue into the future that will cover these costs that are only really anticipated to rise. The impetus for creating its own separate fund and then also taking some of the current expenditures out of the general fund and putting it in here is that that fund would be used for stormwater management and related functions only. So some soft costs, some permitting, but and we'll go into those other project types, but it wouldn't be able to be used for any other public activities. And again, that's one of the other arguments behind why this is a fee and not a tax. But so we'll go into a little bit more detail about the kind of projects that that this would cover, but flood control, general capital improvements for pipes and inlets, maintenance, and other infrastructure. So one of the biggest pieces, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but as part of the MS4 program, pollution prevention, pollution reduction is a major tenet of that. And primarily they're focused on what's called TSS, or total suspended solids. So that's when you have erosion, dirt and mud are flowing from a construction site or even from an agricultural field into a stream. And that causes all kinds of different environmental issues. And a majority of the streams in western Pennsylvania, I won't say majority, but quite a few streams in western Pennsylvania are impaired for siltation and suspended solids. And so communities that have those streams that are impaired within their watershed are required to have a certain annual pollutant reduction load. Flood control, KU Resources is also a borough engineer for Plum Borough. We're working on a couple of flood control projects there. I know you got it here, but in 2019 we had a pretty bad rain in Plum and caused a lot of damage. So we've been looking to create these flood control projects that would help businesses and homeowners in the future from those flood impacts. Going along with the pollution reduction, basin retrofits. So there's a lot of stormwater ponds within the township. Bob has an inventory of those, and a lot of those were designed in the 80s and 90s. They're really not the current state of the art. So part of the projects that we see, and we'll see an example of that here, is retrofitting those basins to be more efficient and or just performing common maintenance that may not have happened under a homeowners association or some other entity. Bridge and culvert repair, we have a couple of slides about that because there are a couple of projects that Bob already has identified as being critical for potential repair and replacement. And then simple stormwater conveyance, your inlets, your pipes. A lot of the infrastructure in the township is corrugated metal pipe. That one had a design life of 25 years. It's been in the ground 50, 60 years now, so it's past its useful life. It's starting to rot out, and that's, you'll start to see sinkholes, pavement, bumps in the pavement, things like that. So those kind of capital improvements largely are centered around upgrading that infrastructure. So the steps that kind of need to be taken are, one, implementing a stormwater fee that will generate the funding for these projects, creating a fund with which those fees would be entered into. Because North Huntington is a township of the first class, an authority has to be created. I believe, and it's something we'll have to work out the legality, but I believe that the NHTMA can serve as that authority, as Bob has already talked about in terms of the collection, but we have to confirm that. Establish the billing system, which we'll talk a little bit here at length. And then providing an opportunity for appeals and credits, again, for those properties that may have installed stormwater management in the past, or if there is a homeowner or a business that would wish to install stormwater management to lower their fee, they could do that. And so all this would be captured in an ordinance. We have a draft ordinance that we shared with staff. Ultimately, we'll share that with the rest of the board and eventually vote on that whenever we determine we want to move forward with that next step. And then there'll be a process of public outreach that we can discuss this with homeowners as well as businesses. Generally speaking, the businesses are going to be the ones that are going to have a much higher fee and are going to be the most concerned about it. So we'll get into the exact fee calculation here in a little bit. But just to give you a little bit more history, Originally, MS4 program was started in Pennsylvania around 2002. In 2011, that's when they kind of realized that no one was doing anything about it, so they created an update to that general permit, and with it, that's when they identified the pollution, these minimum control measures, which I'll talk about in the next slide. In 2018, they stepped that up another notch for those MS4s that had impaired waters within their boundaries. And as I mentioned, the most common impaired water is in this area is siltation and sediment, but there are other impairments as well for nitrogen, nitrates, which would be runoff from agricultural activities, or could be industrial activities. So there's certainly areas in the Mon Valley that have some other impacts that also need to be taken into account. For the most part, North Huntington, it's going to be sediment and suspended solids. So in 2018, that also they also required that an annual report of these be submitted every year. So that goes in every year by September 30th. We came on board around that time. We asked for a 1-month extension, which was granted, and that report got into the DEP this year in October. So within that report, it identifies how the township is going to implement and achieve the goals that are required. And quite honestly, the township's a little bit behind. So again, one of the kind of prescient reasons for having this discussion is how do we get caught up to the extent that we can start to pay for some of these items. So you're not alone. Most other municipalities are also behind, but
According to your slide, the whole nation's behind.
well, that's correct.
Am I right?
That's a true statement. Yes. But at least in terms of the legality in Pennsylvania, a lot of everyone should have. I don't want to say everyone should have known, but reality is this was an act in 2018, and a lot of the MS4s have not really started to implement some of those because largely they didn't have any money. Now with the American Rescue Plan Act funds, some municipalities recently were able to divert some of that funding into doing some of these stormwater projects that they hadn't been able to afford the last 5 years. But obviously those funds are going to run out, and therefore, how do you continue to do this? The regulations, unfortunately, are only going to get more stringent in the future. So this is a cost that is only anticipated to rise. The minimum control measures, I just listed them here. Public outreach and education, that's having, it might be a workshop once a year, having Freddie the Fish come dress up and hand out, stickers to the kids just to talk about stormwater. You see on your inlets, don't dump drains to the river, like a little symbol. That's usually pretty simple. It could be a monthly newsletter, could be as simple as a stormwater website, which you do have a stormwater subsection on your current website. Public involvement and participation, again, that kind of goes hand in hand with that. Illicit discharge detection and elimination, that is basically mapping all of the outfalls on all the streams within the township, and that largely has been done by Ryan and his staff over the last couple of years. Construction site runoff, again, that's regulated largely by the land development ordinances and the erosion and sediment control permits through the county, so that's largely already addressed within your existing ordinances. Same with the post-construction stormwater management new development. The last one I just highlighted in red, the pollution prevention, which I mentioned a couple times. And then good housekeeping for municipal operations. That's part of the pollution prevention is going out and cleaning leaves and sediment out of inlets. And I'm sure your crews do that, and it's getting to the point where you're documenting that so that you can take credit for it. So a lot of it's, again, just instituting, whether it's forms or a log, something like that, with which that tracking can take place so that you can get the commensurate credit for it. So again, a little bit more history on fees. First one in the state was Philadelphia, 2011. It started out about the $6 range. It's now $16.33 a month per ERU, and I'll get into what a ERU is in a moment. Mount Lebanon was the first one in our area. That was about 2018. Right now, there's over 12 in Allegheny County. City of Pittsburgh just enacted theirs in January of 22. As far as I can tell, there's only 2 in Westmoreland County right now, Daryborough and Latrobe. So you can see here the fees that they have, $650 and $750. Just for reference, Charlie and I both happen to live in Plum. It's $5 a month. They just voted to raise it to 10. Monroeville's $10 a month. The city of Pittsburgh right now is $6.95, and it's going up to $7.95 next year. And they're going to be incrementally bumping theirs up. So just to give you a flavor for some of the fees in the area. This is one of the projects that the township has completed recently. So I don't know all the details on it. Bob can speak
Sure.
to a lot of it, but basically we wanted to illustrate that this is an example of a capital project that would have, in theory, been paid out of the stormwater fund. So that's $265,000 that came out of the general fund budget that, in theory, would have been, a good example of a project that would have been completed under the stormwater fund. So, again, I believe this was a replacement of pipes. As you can see here, structures. I can see the slide on the right, some pretty old pipe there that had collapsed. So, typical projects in our area with infrastructure of the age of which they are.
Yeah, I could take this slide,
Okay.
Tyson, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, KU asked the township to put together a list of projects that we would foresee within the next 5 years that the fee would pay for, and we have a list of projects that total around $9 million. And again, we're looking at over a 5-year period. And the first one was the Haywood Road culvert replacement. And we have kicked this project down the road a number of years. And it's really time to fund it, whether it's next year or the year after.
And here's the pictures of that to
Yeah.
support Bob's statement. So.
This, they call us, it's called a culvert, or PennDOT considers this a bridge because of definition. So it's on a national bridge inspection program, and it's be inspected every 2 years by PennDOT. But given the current condition of it, it's inspected every 6 months, and it needs replaced. Have the total project estimate $465,000, but part of that would be some stream bank stabilization, so we could get some MS4 credits for that. The next one on the list is Pine Hollow Road and stream bank stabilization. There's a severely eroded stream bank that the toe of the stream has eroded, and that's caused stability to the roadway. And it's eligible for a stormwater project because of the stream. And I have estimated $400,000, and about $125,000 of that would be credits for MS4 because of the reduction of sedimentation. Also, the next one, in our NPDS permit that is good for 5 years that we got approved in 2019, so it's 2019 through 2024. Tyson mentioned a pollution reduction program that we're required. In our permit, we said, this is our pollution reduction program. We are going to spend this money. We haven't started because we haven't had a fee. But just because we haven't had a fee doesn't mean the requirements aren't still there. So we're going to have to find a way. And this stream restoration to 2,500 feet is part of the study that it was Lennon Smith Solar did back in 2019 on behalf of the township. And they came up with about $4 million of projects between stream restoration and basin retrofits that should have been done within the next 5 years. Those numbers are 4 years old, and with inflation, we'll see later that we've added a factor of 1.3 to those, and we'll bump the costs up. But we'll be going over those particular projects a little bit later. Another one I had on the list is Mike Road Storm Sewer upgrade. It's kind of a little bit like the McCannon Storm Sewer, but it's a lot of deteriorated corrugated metal pipe. It's undersized. It's parallel to the roadway. If you're familiar with Mike Road, it extends from the Youghiogheny River up to Turner Valley. It's probably, I don't know, 1,000 feet long. But the parallel storm sewer goes down so far, then it makes a right, and it goes right underneath the house. And it's corrugated metal pipe. So we need to replace that in its entirety, and where it goes underneath the house, abandon that and grout that and get an outfall into the stream that makes sense. And when I say the McCannon project, we had a 36-inch diameter pipe go underneath a garage, and then we had to abandon that, and we grouted that. We didn't build it, but somehow it got handed down to the township. The next one is Kenda Dam, and there's a number of issues with Indian Lake and the Kenda Dam. And I have improvements to stabilize the dam spillway downstream channel and dam seepage. We just did an inspection on the dam. We have some issues. There's water coming from the lake, going underneath the dam, and it's seeping out into the downstream channel. We can't have that. We got to cut that off. There's a number of ways, and we will be working with KU Resources to address that. The covered bridge that goes over the spillway, there's a beam that's in the middle that's collapsed, and so we're going to, it's pedestrian traffic only, and we have to take the bridge, jack it up, and replace the beams. The downstream channel from the spillway is really eroding significantly. Those big rock pillars that are in there, they're not doing a whole lot to reduce the amount of erosion, so we got to pull those out and do a fine graded riprap in there to protect that. Plus, we have no way of drawing the lake down. We don't have a drawdown structure. We want to do that. So our estimate for that project total is $750,000, and we feel about $200,000 is eligible for MS4. The long-run watershed flood control projects. We got a grant from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they were doing it's about an 18-month study, and at the conclusion of the study, there will be some projects that will be capital improvement projects that will be recommended. We don't have those lists specifically, but we estimated about $1.5 million, and $250,000 would be MS4 eligible. And finally, to go back to our pollution reduction program, the basin retrofits, rain garden, detention basin with focal point. These basins are listed on this slide up here that were included in Lennon Smith Solar Rays report back in 2019. We need to start on those, and we should start on those this year, whether there's a stormwater fee or not. We don't have it budgeted, but we really need to take a look at this year of doing a budget amendment, going back to our fund balance and taking money out of that, perhaps $500,000, and start this work this year. At least get started. We should have been doing this back in 2020 from our permit, which we said we're going to fund this and we're going to do this, but like many others, we haven't. And I think that concludes so it's a total of $9 million. So figure about $1.8 million per year, and whether it's a stormwater fee, and if the fee doesn't go away, then we have to find some way of making this a sustainable tax to properly fund these MS4 projects and other stormwater improvement projects.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about how do we come up with what the correct commensurate fee is for the residents and the businesses in the township. Just tell me when you're going to pop in. So most of the municipalities that have enacted a stormwater fee have been kind of using the same general premise, and that's largely based on some guidance that's been provided by by both Penn State Extension, as well as Southwest Planning Commission, to give you some examples. And I put some references in the back of the slides that I can send the commissioners if you want some more information. But the premise is you calculate what an equivalent residential unit is. And essentially, that boils down to what is the average house plus driveway. What is the average amount of impervious surface that a typical residence in the township has? And so North Huntington Township has a little more impervious than maybe the city of Pittsburgh, which has much more dense and smaller properties. Other municipalities might have a little larger. So these kind of range. But we'll go into how we determine the calculation here for North Huntington. So the steps are we're going to establish what this typical equivalent residential unit is for the township, and then we will go and measure the non-residential properties to determine exactly how much impervious they have. We'll divide that number by this average number, and that will then be a multiplier. So if we'll go into that math here in a moment just to articulate that. So most of the ordinances and the way that we wrote the draft ordinances, that the only exemptions are for properties that have less than 800 square foot of impervious. So virtually it's going to be every property other than farm, field, or agricultural, let's say. Or it may not even be those if the farmhouse is on the same property, let's say. But again, it is only based on impervious area. It's not based on total land area. So, generally speaking, folks that have large parking lots are going to pay the biggest bills, big buildings and large parking lots, as opposed to people with just a lot of amount of land or forest or what have you. And again, when we wrote this, we were still under the premise that there would be no exemptions for tax exempt entities. So as of right now, we're still kind of operating under that premise until we kind of get further guidance based on that ruling that was mentioned.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said there.
I said for right now, we were operating under the premise that there weren't going to be any other exempt entities.
And now that this case has come down, have you seen it?
I think ultimately, I think we need to let it play out. We were kind of talking about that a little bit. The reality is I don't think that there are many, and there certainly are some, but there aren't many tax exempt properties in the township that
Well,
would
you
be
have all
subject
of
to
the
school districts. Like there's,
Any municipal authority, any turnpike property,
yes.
any of those entities, any other
know.
state agency properties?
Correct. Yeah. So there are a few, but I mean, there's still over 1,000 businesses.
Oh, I
So
don't
yeah.
disagree.
So, but yeah, certainly there are some, but it's not like, not like looking at Oakland where you have CMU and Pitt,
Right.
and literally, 90% of the impervious area there is going to, or State College, let's say. So there certainly are some, but I think that, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, and obviously we have to talk to you, Bruce, and Harry, and kind of continue with staff to formulate this. But there's obviously a documented need, and so if you don't get the fee from those couple of entities, you're still going to get most of the fee that you need to cover these projects. That's my opinion.
All right, so wait a second, I gotta stop you, man.
Sure.
What governmental authority is mandating MS4? You've gotta know that, right?
So it's
Who is it?
essentially the power behind it is the Federal Clean Water Act, and then each state has their ability to enforce the Clean Water Act regulations. In Pennsylvania, that's governed by the DEP, Pennsylvania DEP. They've required each MS4 to have a permit, and then so that's basically the
All right,
short
it's a simple
answer.
answer. The feds and the state. And we just said that there were certain state entities that are exempt.
That's right.
So the state and the feds mandate to the local people, yet the state somehow allows itself to have exemption.
Convenient, right? Yes.
Very convenient. So let's go ahead and stick it to the people. Thank you, state. Thanks, feds. Okay.
Yep. No. Well
I want
said.
to make sure that's what I'm hearing, brother.
That's
You're
well
saying
said.
it the right way. That's exactly correct.
Yep.
That's great. Not. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, so just to go into the math a little bit, this example here is showing a a fictional example where that equivalent residential unit is 1,000 square feet, and if that ERU, if that was assessed at a $1 per ERU, essentially, in the way that we've set it up, we were assuming that the billing would be monthly. Some of the municipalities do it quarterly, some do it annually. But for right now, we were assuming it would be monthly because, again, if billed through the municipal authority, they bill monthly. Some of the municipal authorities bill quarterly. Anyway, so in this fictional example, one ERU, $1 per ERU, your typical homeowner would be paying $1 a month. We'll get into North Huntington's here in just a moment. So normally, you round up if it's over 1.5, and typically we're not advocating to do decimal places for billings. It just gets too complicated. So again, all single-family residences would be billed as one ERU. So quite honestly, someone that has a 1,000 square foot house is going to be paying more than their share, but someone that has a 5,000 square foot house is paying less. But we could do additional calculations to make that commensurate for everyone. That's something we've discussed, but for right now, we've decided to keep it simple and come up with this average method. So basically, how we determined this is we looked at quite a few both existing and relatively newer residential developments, figured out what the combination is for that single-family home plus the driveway, and have come up with an average of around 2,800 square feet of typical impervious. We've rounded it up to 3,000. So basically, we're setting that equivalent residential unit at 3,000. So like I said, if your house is 1,500 square feet, versus someone that's 5,000 square feet, but again, we just chose this simpler method for at least for the time being. So the fee that we've talked about implementing was $7 a month. So the fee that could potentially be generated by this is, as you can see the math here, multiplying the number of residences times that fee amount is a little over $1 million. And then we'll get into how we calculated the businesses here in a second. Charlie will go into that. But the potential fee that could be generated by those non-residential businesses on average would total about $800,000. So in theory, this fee could generate upwards of $1.8 million, and based on the math of the projects that Bob had described a little bit earlier, the current demand is about $1.9 million. So we wanted to kind of get that as close as possible, or at least that's the reason for how we derived the fee amount. So I'm going to let Charlie talk a little bit about the non-residential businesses.
All right, thank you. For the non-residential businesses, we're looking at the Route 30 corridor, and anything that's basically not a house. As Tyson said, a residential building, we suggest doing it at a flat rate at $7 per resident. For the businesses, because there's such a wide variety of impervious area, how big the parking lot is, all those things, the rooftop size, they have private driveways into their businesses. We coming up with a total, we like to get the total amount of impervious areas for the amount of businesses that are in North Huntington. And that number is a little over 1,000 businesses in North Huntington. So just to do a sample size, we did 10 businesses in North Huntington. We had the building footprint area from GIS data from the county, and then we went through, we measured the parking, the driveway areas in the next column, and we added that up to a total impervious area. You take that total impervious area, divide it by that 3,000 square feet that we calculated for what's one ERU, and then you times it by 7 to get the monthly fee for each businesses. So you can see that, this has to be discussed. Some other townships, they do a cap. Like in Plumboro, it was $50, and that they raised it to $100 for the maximum cap for any non-residential building. So just doing the math, we came up with a median of $66 just to get rough numbers for you know, what this program could generate funds for.
Most, I'll just say, most municipalities do not have a cap. Just a little anecdote, when they implemented the fee in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia airport, they went from roughly a $4,000 a month fee to about $120,000 a month. So that was huge incentive for them to build their own stormwater ponds, and now if you fly in there, you'll see that they have a lot of constructed wetlands and things, but
With this case, that's owned by an authority, it's
So-
probably going to be exempt.
yeah, so that's what I don't know, are the folks that have paid the fee over the last 10 years, or in Mount Lebanon in the last 5 years, that are now exempt, are they gonna be asking for their money back? So some municipalities, like for instance, I know in Monroeville, Gateway School District has paid the fee,
That's me.
but.
And Forbes Trail. And they're going to definitely ask for their money back.
But they were aware that this case was coming. So
Sure.
like I know, well, I know Monroeville Mall hasn't paid their fee, but they're not an authority, but,
They just haven't paid it because they don't have the money.
exactly, yeah, because their fee is about $200,000 a year for Monroeville Mall, just to give you a little bit of sense, but.
Well, you just have to pay attention to those entities that aren't.
So that would be, for me, that would be the biggest risk, is if you collect this fee and spend the money, and then a couple of years later find out you gotta pay it back, well, then that's obviously an issue. If you never plan on having collected it, and we work out the numbers to such a degree that getting that would be a bonus, then, you know, so there's definitely a lot of thought that needs to go into that, given this ruling, but, you know, again, my opinion is that this rule is gonna probably snake through the courts for another 2 years, so you can't wait that long.
Here's what you know. Commonwealth Court now has acted on this. The next step is to request the Supreme Court to grant a la carte. And what that means is you got to ask for permission. And if the Supreme Court, one in let's say 100 cases, they grant a la carte, they will do that petition. Henceforth, it'll be done probably in the next 3 months. And the Supreme Court will act on that, I would think, by June. And then the reason that is because they deal with that right of permission all the time. And if the court doesn't grant the permission to take the appeal, it's over. So Commonwealth Court becomes pretty much the last say-so, and that's the court that just ruled. And I'm comfortable saying I will be surprised if the Supreme Court would grant a la carte. There has to be a constitutional reason. You just don't grant a la carte just because you don't like the decision. There has to be some constitutionality issue raised, and I don't think there's any in this case. So when you say it's going to take 2 years, don't be surprised if it only takes 6 months. And the Supreme Court may not grant a la carte, and if that's the case, it's over.
Appreciate that insight, yeah.
Yeah, one other thing I want to say. This tax, and that's what it is, it's just like you paying your sanitary sewer bill. You're going to have this forever. This is not going away. It's going to be a constant, continual tax that people are going to pay in addition to all the other taxes that you're paying. And now they're measuring stormwater. They're going to measure the quality and quantity of stormwater. And it's getting crazy. This is going to be significant over the next 20 years. I say that because I'm old and I'm not going to have to pay.
Yes, so our last couple slides are just kind of example projects from other municipalities. You know, Tyson already mentioned that, you know, the repairing the old pipes in the roadways, the old tin whistle pipes that are all rotted out. Another municipality used the money to replace a lot of these pipes all through yards and everything like that. Another project used the funds for was a culvert repair. You could see the culvert is similar to the Haywood Drive. Culvert got inspected by the state. It got, you know, categorized as level 0, meaning it had to be shut down. So Plumboro, they developed a design and plan to replace this culvert. So that just giving you guys examples of, you know, similar projects that, you know, these monies, the funds have been going to.
Bruce, you probably use that every day, right?
Yes.
It's quarter mile from his office.
And this is just an example project from a stormwater retrofit. You can see the picture on the right, you know, the basin has big trees, grass, all growing throughout it, and that's unfortunately a lot of basins have kind of got out of control. So using the money to retrofit it and make it look like the basin on the left to meet the requirements for the MS4 NPDES permit.
So Charlie, that was converted to a bioretention facility?
That is correct. Yeah,
Yeah, I could explain that in detail if anyone cares, but.
Yeah, why don't you, Tyson?
So,
What
you know, as
most-
Charlie mentioned, woody vegetation, that pond was installed in the 90s. So basically, it has 30 years of silt and sediment that has collected over the years. It was probably never maintained. So you basically muck out a foot or two of that bottom. You replace a special soil mix in the bottom to let that water percolate into the ground a little bit better. That's where you get your nutrient credits. So you're filtering out the nitrogen, the potassium, and things of that nature. Repairing the spillway, repairing the outlet, making sure that there's no structural failures of the facility itself, and ultimately, you know, if you can, increase the volume. Oftentimes, that's not going to be possible due to other existing constraints. But the one thing we can do again is increase the volume by making it slightly deeper, or again, amending the soils. But as Bob mentioned, a lot of that is normally known as a rain garden or a bioretention area. So that's typically how we would, you know, in the 80s and 90s, we just built these giant massive detention ponds. Now this is the kind of the next evolution of those ponds is making them both hold the water back from a flood control perspective, but also allow it to percolate back. That's pretty much all we have. Take more questions. There's a couple more resources on here. Certainly we can email the slides to the rest of the commissioners. Ryan has that, John has that as well, so we'll get those to you. But I put a couple FAQs on there from some of these organizations in the state. So. Originally, we were planning on maybe rolling this out later this year. We'll have to deliberate with staff and Bruce and the rest of the commissioners to figure out, you know, what's appropriate, when is appropriate to do this. You know, again, I think that there's clearly a demonstrated need in terms of the financial dollars that are there in the projects that need to be completed as a result of this project.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Who owns the pipe underneath the house that was on Mike Road?
I don't think there's an easement, and I think the township would make the case without an easement. You know, it's others, not the townships.
Okay.
And I think we could have made the case there for the McCannon project also. It was done by others, but over the years, it's our stormwaters. It's part of the collection system to convey water from Mike Road to the stream, and yeah.
And that is a common occurrence, that the pipe was installed by someone else, and you know, maybe that property got sold and the new homeowner doesn't know anything about it. But you know, similarly to the ponds that might not have been maintained by the HOAs, at the end of the day, it's still unfortunately the township's responsibility under the MS4 permit to have all these things in compliance. So unfortunately, that buck is getting passed in a lot of cases back to the township, which is sucks even more to use Mr. Goss's, pointing that out, right? So.
And really, anything that is charged to a business is just going to get passed down to the consumer anyway, so the consumer will pay it.
Yes, agreed.
So, and the reason I bring that up is we've had that issue with that damaged pipe down at the bottom of Route 30, the bottom of Jacktown Hill, which, if I'm not mistaken, is still in a lawsuit. Possibly,
You're talking about beneath the car wash?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'm like comparing those two scenarios.
I'll give you one other, I guess one other anecdote, just from, you know, my career. I was an expert witness on a case for a project in Latrobe. There's a shopping center in Latrobe that has a couple of stormwater pipes that flow underneath it, and ultimately they were corrugated metal pipes. They rotted out. One of the pipes collapsed. A couple of businesses that are just upstream of this got flooded 3-4 times. So they sued the city of Latrobe. And you know, obviously it went to court, and basically, you know, the city tried to argue that they were doing their maintenance and doing things. They couldn't provide any records to document that they had ever maintained the pipe. So again, one of the housekeeping things that you know, we talked about in terms of increasing housekeeping is documentation of everything, photos, logs of where the crews were, so forth. That way, it provides that, you know, to the extent that it can, a little bit of protection, you know, should a lawsuit come into play. So. But unfortunately, I've been involved in a number of cases like that. Some of them are municipal-owned pipes, some of them are private-owned pipes, and it's, you know, it's unfortunately no good solutions for a lot of that, just because it all costs money.
And this is another comment that I would make, is that the more homes you build, the more impervious surface you create. So perhaps those people should pay more than like the little guy that's in one of the company coal houses, you know, that's with a retirement income. So,
And I think that is something you could write into your ordinances. You know, obviously the Act 167 plan got passed 2 years ago here in the county, and that does allow you to, you know, to tighten up the requirements for when new development has to do stormwater. So I would say traditionally, single-family homes, regardless of the size, didn't have to do stormwater, but now certainly that is on the table for sure.
But another way of looking at Virginia with the stormwater requirements and the newer ponds are basically bioretention, and there's a lot more money, and they're paying for that when they purchase their lot. So there's stormwater management, plus they're doing it to the newer standards to meet the MS4 requirements and pollution reduction. So there's rain gardens, bioretention that are built into these ponds that they're building today.
And you know, I also design you know, housing developments and things like that, and certainly, for instance, I'm doing one up in Pine Creek in McCandless, and so a lot of residents came out because, you know, what are you going to do about the flooding in my backyard? The reality is that, you know, the projects that come in and get approved by land development are meeting the requirements of your ordinance. So you can't put all that onus on new developers to fix the sins of the past, and ostensibly implementing this fee is a way of trying to correct that in as a commensurate way as possible.
now, does the township get any credit if a homeowner voluntarily installs a rain garden?
Yes. So, you know, as I mentioned, there's a credit and appeal process. You can apply. In theory, what would happen is the homeowner would apply for a credit. Then that, you know, could be documented by the township and then included as part of their the MS4 report. So if you've got enough homeowners to do that, in fact, in Plum, you know, one of the public outreach things we did is we've done a couple of rain barrel workshops. You know, they're 55-gallon barrels. In fact, we got them from Delalo's over here. They were former for olive oil barrels. But you think of it as a drop in the bucket, but every little bit actually does help. And so, you know, the unfortunate thing is, or depending on how you look at this, the payback period based on the fees that we've presented for most non-residential customers is going to be in excess of 15 years. So a lot of them are just going to look at the fee and say, well, hey, I don't want to put in an expensive $25,000, $50,000 stormwater plan because my return on investment is going to be so much longer than your typical, you know, investing period would be. So we found that unfortunately it doesn't necessarily incentivize at least non-residential folks to install stormwater management. But again, if you can get a, you know, for lack of a better, put it a grassroots movement for people to to do that. And there's funding out there that you can get from, different watershed associations and different grants to supply rain barrels and things like that. Again, every little bit does help, and that would be able to be reflected in the permit.
Thank you.
Any other board questions or comments?
I'd like to make one, just try to be as quick as I possibly can. So this is a mandate, like it or not, to a degree, we're gonna have to accept it. But what we can do is mitigate the cost to the citizens. And how do we do that? I think we'd be a little bit smarter. I had a gas line go bad at my house. Okay, it was gonna cost a lot of money to dig up from the meter all the way to the road. But the gas company doesn't do that anymore. They re-sleeve. You guys tracking what I'm saying? So instead of digging out these culverts and removing all the bridge and all everything, I mean, stripping the whole land down to nothing and then having brand new rebuilt. If you have a culvert that's, let's say, 20 feet, could we not re-sleeve it with an 18-foot, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
We're at 20, we go to 18, then we have a fill between the 18 and the 20, like a hyper jack.
And that's actually exactly what we did at this culvert here, Malabar Culvert. It was a 24-foot span.
Yeah.
We put in a new 22-foot
Yeah.
span and grouted in between. However, that probably is more the exception in the rule because it's based on hydraulics. So you
Right.
can't increase the water surface elevation to all. In this particular case, this stream is right behind houses, so you can't increase that water surface elevation for all those houses upstream. So certainly that is something we will look at. And in the case that we certainly. Yeah, that is on the table, and we will try to find the most cost-effective way with working with Bob and the rest of the staff to do that. But quite honestly, that will probably be the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, I think when we put the burden of financial on all people, all citizens, because everybody's going to bear this burden, I think it's wise for the powers that be to come up with a sensible plan, in this case, re-sleeving. So $9 million that we talked about maybe now becomes more palatable at maybe $4 million. That $7 a month now becomes $3.50 a month. I guess we got to pay the fiddler.
One of the other options that is potentially available, and one of the things that Plum does is, Plum has hired an additional 5 crew members on their public works department to purely do stormwater management. They go clean out inlets, they replace inlet boxes, they clean out pipes, they do some of these flood control things and the basin retrofits. So if you can work that into your budget to hire additional staff and do that at your cost as opposed to paying a contractor, you can definitely realize those benefits. So that is an option available to you to try to keep the funds down. We haven't really talked about ways to quote-unquote value engineer or get that down, but that is one potential option.
If we go back and look at Haywood, we have looked at Haywood about re-sleeving that, and that is a possibility, but we do need to do watershed analysis to see if that'll work. But the abutments are really bad. We just can't stick a pipe through there. They're bad. They need replaced. But we are, before we decide what the final product is going to be, we're going to do some value engineering and try to keep that cost down as much as we can. You mentioned about going from $9 million to $4 million. That's not feasible. I mean, we might be talking $9 million to 8.5 or 8, but we will do the best we can to have an engineered solution that works for each case.
I don't know how well this, so take this for what it's worth, but, it's talking to your local representatives, trying to get funding for some of these projects, whether it's, technically RCAP should not be used for municipalities, but some municipalities have been able to get it. But there's funding out there. So we have not necessarily, you have applied for some grants for some of these projects, but there is additional funding out there that will potentially help close that gap. So that's also something that we will look into to try to bring the total cost down and then also pass that along to the residents. This is basically just taking the first step at it to say, here's what your need is, here's how you pay for it, but there could be other ways to make ends meet.
One other comment I'd like to make. If we're going to be doing stream bank stabilization or whatever near Indian Lake where the dam is, there's a lot of invasive species, giant knotweed there. I think we ought to take care of that while we're doing the stream banks.
Oh,
Yeah, that-
absolutely.
Yep, that is part of that process, yes.
Any other board comments? I think, getting kind of what Eric, maybe Virginia were saying, I think we do some of this stuff now. I think with staff and maybe with your guys' help, we could try to do a better job of documenting and getting credit where maybe we are doing some of the work. Might be a small bite of that big chunk, Eric, but we could try to get the credits, well, obviously when we're redoing paving and putting new culverts in, or when the crews are going out and cleaning, maybe using some more new computer software for Public Works to take documentation and get that. So it might be a small win there to try to document that and get credits for.
Yeah, we've been working with Public Works, and particularly through our Tracer program, to document when they clean culverts out and do some house cleaning, and trying to get credit for whatever we can.
Any other board comments? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Manager Falk?
That is all I have.
All right. There's no planning engineering topics, any old business. Not seeing any further board comments.
Motion to adjourn? Second.
Discussion. All in favor by stating aye. Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Meeting adjourned at 8 o'clock. Executive